Come for the bread, stay for the politics. I'm Ben Walsh, and this is Let's Meet Bread. Today on Let's Meet Bread, we are doing a bit of a truncated episode, but that's going to be okay because we're making a delicious focaccia. Now, this is not going to be your nonna's focaccia. This is going to be a little different, but at the same time, it should still be delicious and will make for a wonderful party treat. Or if you're going to bake it the way I'm going to bake it, it might even be good for some regular bread toasting and sandwiches. So let's get started. So what we're going to do first, we need to mix together some dry ingredients. Here I have 6 cups of all-purpose flour. The recipe calls for 5½ cups of all-purpose flour plus 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour. I don't really like the taste of whole wheat flour, so I'm not using it. But if you do want to go that route, you're welcome to do so. So we're just going to pour this in here. And to it, we are going to add our instant yeast. We have 1 tablespoon of instant yeast here. Let's just put that on top. This is all going to get mixed together, so it doesn't matter what order you put it in. Next up, we have kind of an interesting set of ingredients. So I have a herb medley here. So I have a teaspoon of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of thyme, 1 teaspoon of basil, and 1 teaspoon of parsley. Now, I'm using parsley because I prefer the taste of parsley to oregano. If you don't like parsley, the recipe actually calls for oregano. All right, so we're just going to sprinkle this in here. Now, the recipe also calls for rosemary, but we don't put it in yet, so don't put it in yet. We're going to add it later. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add just a little bit of fresh cracked pepper, about a tablespoon, and I'm just doing this here. It's going to be a nicer, fruitier taste. Just so you're aware, I am using dried herbs for everything I'm doing today, with the exception of the freshly ground salt and pepper. If you want a lovelier, fruitier flavor, you're going to want to do this with all fresh herbs. Okay. Now you want to make sure the fresh herbs have been washed and then lightly pat dry. Just put a little bit of salt in here. Now I'm using 2 different salts today. I'm using a regular grind table salt. I use Pink Himalayan sea salt for my grinder, but we're also going to use coarse salt on top a little later. Okay, so this is going to provide some extra flavor and some beautification to our focaccia once it is ready. But for now, we're not using it because we're just making the dough right now. Okay? All right. So next thing we need to do is create a well in our dry mixture here that we can put our wet ingredients in. So grab yourself a whisk or a spatula, or even just your hands, and just get in there and mix your dry ingredients together. And once you've done that, just make yourself a little well. I'm going to be doing pretty much everything by hand today. Just because it feels a little bit more authentic to do it that way. But if you don't want to, you are more than welcome to use a different way of doing things, either with a whisk, or even you can plop this in the stand mixer and it will create a lovely well for you after about 30 seconds. All right, so I've got my well. I can't really show it to you or else I'll lose its lovely shape. But what's going to go in it first is 2 tablespoons, that's tablespoons of olive oil. We will use lots more olive oil later, but for now we're just putting a little bit in for that lovely olive flavor. And then we're putting in about a cup of water, all right? So I've got 2 3/4 cups of water here, okay? But for now, we're just gonna put in a little bit of that, so about a cup of it. And this is at about 100 degrees. So let's see. Now, some of this water is a little discretionary, so what I mean by that is what's going to happen is we are going to only use so much of the water to create our light, our shaggy dough here. So fold this in at first, get this all kind of mixed in, and then you can add water as needed to make a nice sticky dough. Okay. This is still going to have to be kneaded, so don't worry about it. If it feels like it's not getting as wet as it could, that's okay. We are going to add more water to it. We've just put in about a cup of water for now, just to get things playing together And if you're using fresh herbs, it should smell amazing. I'm using dried herbs and garlic powder, and it still smells really lovely. Just kind of playing with it right now. All right, so obviously you can see that I'm going to need a bit more water. I have some bits of the dough that are coming together, but most of it is still flour. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add the rest of that water. Okay, I'm just going to... All right, so we've added this in, and we are now going to... Oops. Minor technical difficulties, sorry about that, guys. All right, so we're going to add in the rest of our water slowly, right, because we don't want to put too much water in here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water and then knead it in the bowl a little bit. Really what we want is for all the flour and dry ingredients to come together in one mass. And we want it to be a little wet, right, because we're going to knead it, and as we knead it, we're going to add more flour to it. Oh, a little bit escaped. So if you use all the water, that's just fine. Don't worry about it. And if it turns out you added a tiny bit of too much water, it's a little sticky, guess what? During the kneading process, we can fix all of that. So don't worry about it. All right, you can see now it's coming together a little bit better. Oh, I still got some escaping. But you can also see that I've clearly got some powder in here. So you know what that means? We are adding some more water. All right. And actually, I'm just going to add the rest of my water because I only had a little bit left. All right. So it's gonna seem like it's a little too liquidy at first, but that's okay. As I said, all of that is going to be cured when we turn this out onto our board and really start working it. And if you don't like the way it's shaping up in the bowl, you can always just add a little bit more flour. But I'm doing it all by hand today, so we're just gonna play with it until it looks right. All right, so this is clearly, if you look here, it's a little bit too liquidy, but that's okay. Because what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take the tiniest bit of extra flour and just dump that on there. Probably about 1/8 of a cup is what I just put in. And we're just gonna get this to kind of solidify up just a little bit. Just so it comes together a bit more so it's kneadable. Because in its current state, can't really be kneaded. And as you can see, it's kind of getting everywhere. So we're getting closer. Oops, you're over here, you're over here. It's getting closer, but not yet. So we're just gonna add that other 1/8 of a cup of flour in here. And just do the same thing. Get some kneading on in the bowl. And then once we're ready, we're gonna lightly flour our work surface here. And we are going to knead until it passes the window pane test. Today's episode, by the way, is going to be a little different. One, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a little shorter, but also because we are going to have 2 politics segments interspersed with our bread segment. Because this has to rise twice, but they're both really short rises, so I figured let's just do the whole thing on camera. Let's do everything on camera today. Make it special. All right. So we very much have one mass here, still very wet, but that's okay. So let's put this aside real quick. Just, there we go. Let's get some of that off. Don't worry about touching it. It does get baked. So no worries there. All right, so we're gonna put in a little bit of our lightly flour our work surface here. Just spread that out. And then we're just going to turn our dough out onto here, and we're going to knead until it is nice and ready. Now it says 5 to 6 minutes, so if you really want to set a timer, you definitely can, but I find the best way to knead is just to knead until it's ready. And as you know, if you are regular watchers of the show, that my method of telling when something is ready is the window pane test. So that's what we're going to do. All right. And again, this kind of looks like a heaping hunky mass. That's perfectly okay, because so just so you know, just something about bread doughs in general, it is easier to, correct them if they're too wet, right? Once it's too dry, it's really hard to get it to recover. But because you can almost always add flour to a recipe, it becomes much easier to rectify the putting in of too much water. All right. Now, if you have some left in your bowl like I do, don't worry about it. Do try and get it out, of course, because the more the merrier as far as bread is concerned, in my humble opinion. But it's really not that big a deal. So I'm going to try and get a little bit more of this out. But if it doesn't come out, that's okay. All right, so I've gotten pretty much all of it out. You can see there's a tiny bit left, but no big deal. All right, and you can see that I've used almost all of the flour on my board so far, so I'm just going to put a little bit more flour on this and a little bit more flour on my board, about a quarter or a third of a cup. Again, there's no pressure to use all of it, so if you put a little bit too much down, it's all right. All right, so once you can get a decent handle on it, and you can see that I have not gotten to that stage yet, you're going to start to try and knead it. You can see it's still sticking very much to my fingers, so it's not, it still needs some kneading. All right, so I'm going to flour my other hand here because I'm getting a bunch of flour in, so we're going to try and get some of this off. And again, this is just happening because I'm using my hands for everything. If you're using tools for this, obviously you're not going to have the problem with it sticking to you. But don't worry about it. My hands are clean, and besides the fact, it does get baked. So, all right, so we've got almost all that off. All right, put a little bit more of this on here. Perfect. All right, so you can see that our dough is in one mass, and we're just going to start the kneading process. Just take some more of this dough. Now, some of your dough may be flying off into little pieces. That's all right. We're just going to do what we always do. Use extra flour to help it stop from sticking. Now, the other great thing about doing everything by hand is that it's almost impossible to over-knead. So whether you've set that timer or whether you haven't, it's going to be really difficult if you're just doing this by hand with no machine at all to make this, to knead it too much. And you can see now that it really is starting to come together. And although I've got one hand that's still a little covered in dough, but in my other hand, you can see that it doesn't really stick at all, which is perfect. We are kind of getting where we want to go. So what that means is we're not likely to add any more flour unless it really needs it, which it might, right? As we knead, it will generate gluten, and it will start to desire more flour, right? It will get sticky again, and it will need more flour to make it not sticky. But for now, we've got the dough that really is not as sticky as it was. And you can see before, because it was essentially a soup, right? So we've really come a long way in a very short amount of time. And if you're keeping track, we added about half to 3/4 cup of flour on top of everything. So this recipe is a tiny bit bigger than it was, but no big deal. All right, you can see it kneads really nicely now. Hopefully yours is the same way. And it should be a nice soft dough, right? Because essentially this is just flour, water, and herbs, and a little bit of oil. And this is getting sticky again, so you can see that I'm pulling up some more of the flour that I need, and I'm probably going to be adding a little bit more flour to our work surface. And again, as you add flour little bits at a time, I know I went a little bit more than I typically say, because I say to do about 1/8 of a cup at once, and I did closer to 1/4. But that's going to be a judgment call. So you can see this is getting sticky. All right, so we need some more flour. I'm just going to put in a little bit here. And when you're working with flour, just spread it out, right? It's going to be easier to work with. You can knead pretty much anywhere on your board and get flour right away. And just push and fold like we do for anything else. Now, that's going to be a little faster in a stand mixer, obviously. So feel free to use that to simplify it. Remember, if you're using an electric mixer or a standing mixer to do any of this work, just be careful you don't do it for too long so that you do not over knead your lovely focaccia. Over kneading, by the way, I know I really haven't explained this in past episodes, but over kneading can limit its ability to proof and can inhibit how it proves. So, and it also affects the final product, right, just generally. So we just want to make sure that it's nice. It does what we want it to, but also is not overdone. But if you're doing it by hand, that's pretty much never a worry for you. All right, so I've got a tacky dough in front of me. Let's roll it into a ball. And again, just use your cupping motion and just pass it back and forth between your hands. And we're just going to take a little bit of this dough, twist, using our thumb and finger to turn it out a bit like a pizza. And actually, it should smell a little bit like a pizza, so not so much an exaggeration at this point. And we're just going to spread it out as thin as we can without it breaking. And once it's at that nice and thin, oh, yeah. So you can see it broke. So it is not yet done. So we need to knead it a little bit more. But that's the best way to check. I know there are other ways to check, but really the best way to check to make sure that every single time you have a bread that is going to rise well and that is kneaded to perfection is going to be that window pane test. Boards are getting away from me over here. And the other thing too, if you're looking to see if you're worried about the amount of flour we're adding, that's okay, perfectly fair. One of the ways that you can be sure that you're not adding too much flour is if your dough is still soft, right? If your dough kind of gets hard, it feels like it is losing some of its elasticity, it's losing some of its softness, it's not as easy to kind of squeeze, you might be putting a little bit too much flour in there. And I would say if you're at that point or if you're near that point, one of the things you can do is just make sure that you've kneaded it enough. And if not, keep kneading before you add more flour, right? At all times, your dough should maintain its nice suppleness, its softness, its light tackiness. All right. So we need this a little bit more. So we're going to try the test again. All right. All right, so I'm going to take just a little bit, squeeze that off. All right. All right, slowly and surely give us a nice thin, and it already broke. So you can see it already broke. Let's try one more time because I think I may have put my thumb through it. We'll just try one more time. Just slowly, carefully, more carefully than I did before. Just all right, so if I slow down a little bit, you can start to see that I'm getting it a little wider. And we're almost there. All right, so yeah. So it still does break. So right, that means we need more kneading, and it's also going to mean that we're going to need more flour. So we're going to put a little bit more flour on here. I'm starting to think that this recipe may have underdone it on the flour or overdone it on the water, but it's all right. We're just going to keep kneading away as you do. And we're just going to make sure that this is the perfect bit of focaccia. We're going to make such a beautiful bread today, guys. So I know this is taking a little bit of time, but it is going to be worth it. Really just get in there, make sure you're stretching those gluten strands. If you want to, right, do the two-handed method. Turn, two-handed, turn, two-handed, turn, two-handed, turn, right? It's a perfectly good way to do it. It's slower, but you can actually see it stretching, right? So you really do get a sense of that you're starting to stretch it. And you'll have a better sense of when it's done too, because the stretching will get easier as you need it. Sorry, not the stretching will get easier, but the strands, like before it breaks, the amount it stretches before it breaks is going to be longer too. So you'll have a decent sense of when it's coming along. All right, but I'm going to go back to the one-handed because I prefer it. I know I say one-handed, I'm using a second hand to help me get it back up, but you can do this with one hand. Just push and turn. Get a little bit more flour in here. No ice cream man today. Usually I can't wait to get disturbed by the ice cream man. And obviously joking about that, it's happy to not have an extra sound on the stream. But you know, usually I've gotten interrupted by now. Where are you, ice cream man? Or woman, or person, ice cream person. And yes, in the chat, I see it is really fluffy. It's a lovely feeling. And when you make this dough yourself, you're gonna notice just how nice and soft and supple it is. And also, this whole room now smells like pizza. I mean, it's just a wonderful smell. If I had to make a bread every week, I would want one that smelled like this. Obviously, try and mix it up a little bit. All right, so we're going to try one more time. We've just been eating it for another 2 or 3 minutes. And we're just going to see. All right. Oh, I've got a little bit more confidence in this one. Let's roll it into a ball real quick. And then we're just going to use our thumb and forefinger to slowly and carefully. Yeah, look at that. It's really stretching now. It's really stretching now. Oh, wow. Look at that stretch. Do you see that? Can you see that on camera? Yeah, let's move it a little closer. Look at that nice stretch. Yeah, I can see right through that. Perfect. All right, this is done. So I'm just gonna put this back into a ball. Oh, my board is moving all over the place. Gotta get something to secure it. All right, so we have our, in a ball, and an extra test, right? If you really like this method, push down, and it comes up about 2/3 the way. Doesn't come up all the way. All right, so now we need to let it rise. So we're gonna let it rise for about 30 minutes in this form until it doubles in size. It might not completely double in size, and that's okay. If you wanna let it rise a little longer, really not the end of the world. What we're just gonna do is we're just gonna do it for the 30 minutes and see where it's at. This rises a second time, remember, in our baking tray, and I'm going to show you what I've done for that because it really is different than what this recipe calls for. So I'm going to tell you what the recipe calls for, and then I'm going to tell you what I've chosen to do and why I've chosen to do it, okay? So let's prepare a bowl. We're going to get a nice big bowl. We're going to lightly pour some olive oil in there. Remember, this is a bread with olive oil in it, so we really want to preserve that beautiful olive flavor that we've gotten in here, along with our herbs, very much like a pizza, if we're making pizza dough, right? Very similar process. So, oops, turned into an oval on me. Here we go. More like a ball. All right, so get your bowl, lightly oil it. We're gonna cover it with plastic wrap, chuck a towel on it, and put it on for 30 minutes so it can rise. Then we'll talk a little bit of politics. After that, we will come back, we will press it into our pan, and then we will let it rise for another 15 minutes. Now, the pressing it into the pan might take a little bit of time because we're going to do it with our fingers. Everything from here gets done with our fingers, but we're not going to put the holes in it yet, okay? We wait till after the second rise to put the holes in it. All right, so for now, let's rise this bread. So I've got my bowl here. Just put a little bit. Now, less than a teaspoon, guys. Less than a teaspoon. You don't really want it to be over-oiled. Luckily, though, with this bread, if you do over-oil it, really not a big deal, because the beautiful thing about focaccia is that it uses lots of oil. If you're making it the traditional way, I'm going to use less oil, and I'm making it a non-traditional way, but that's all right. All right, so lightly oil your bowl, paintbrush, fingers, spoon, doesn't matter. Okay. We're going to take our little ball of bread and plop it in here, turn it around, get oil all over it. Just make sure it's done down perfectly with oil. Beautiful. All right, let me rinse my hands real quick because they're covered in oil. Then we'll put some plastic wrap on here, throw a towel on it, and set a timer. Again, if you have sustainable plastic wrap, feel free to use that. I use this because it's easier. If you have a lid, you can use that too. Just remember what I always say. If you have a lid, just be careful that you're not putting in like a vacuum seal, because if you do, you're going to notice about halfway through your rise that your bread is going to force the lid of your container right off. And whether it flies in the air like it's on some sort of cartoon, or it just kind of pops off, you can never know. So just make sure that you don't use a lid if it completely covers it and creates a vacuum seal. All right. So next thing, cover it with our tea towel. We're going to put it in on our oven here to rise. Now, I'm going to set a time for 30 minutes. So if you're not interested in the politics portion, I will see you in more or less 30 minutes. If you want to stick around for the politics, that's just fine too. I will be there. We will open the whiteboard in just a moment. All right, 30 minutes are on the clock. So let's take a look at the whiteboard. All right, so it has been 30 minutes. So that means we are ready to check our bread. Let's take a look. Holy Toledo. All right, this has more than doubled in size. That's perfect. I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't actually expect it to rise this much, but I was wrong, so what are you gonna do? All right, so let's put this aside here, because we are gonna reuse this. Waste not, want not, guys. All right, so look at this lovely bread. All right, we're gonna put this here. So now we are going to start to shape our bread, okay? So the way that we're gonna do that, so this recipe calls for you to place your bread in a pan like this. This is this pan specifically is 18 by 11. The recipe calls for 17 by 11. The recipe calls for 18 by 11, or a half sheet tray. 17 by 11 will do just fine. But as you might imagine, if you use a tray like this, you're going to get a bread that's only about yay tall, right? Sorry, about yay tall. So I actually wanted a bread that was a little thicker because I want to use it for sandwiches and toast and things. So instead of using a flat tray like this, which is what you're supposed to use, and if you want, you should use, instead, I've lined myself a baking pan. This is a 9 by 13 by 2 baking pan, and we are going to make our focaccia in here. And this is so that the focaccia puffs up really nicely and essentially is great for sandwiches and toast and things. All right, so we are going to, before we pour our bread out, so I have lined my baking pan with oil, and I've stuck parchment to that oil. If you are using a regular sheet tray, you're going to want to use a ton of olive oil just to lubricate this up a little bit. I'm only using a little bit, and I'll add more as I need. But what you're going to want to do is just take your hands and create a nice thin layer for your focaccia. This is going to be lubricating it so that it doesn't stick once it bakes. By the way, it bakes at a very high temperature, 485 degrees. So if you want to wait a little bit, you can, but if you have an oven that's very slow like I do, you want to set your oven to 485 degrees, more or less right now. Okay, so I'm just doing this. I'm taking a couple seconds with it, but if you are already done, or if you want to set your oven first, obviously I can bake this off camera, then you should set your oven to 485 degrees Fahrenheit. One more thing you should note, if you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, I've just put a 2 teaspoon of oil in here. If you're doing it the way I'm doing it in a tall tray like this, be aware your cook time is going to be slightly higher than the cook time, if you are not doing it this way. Same basic result though. You know, it's going to look lovely and golden brown, and it's going to register at 205 degrees when checked multiple times in multiple different places. All right, so we are all lubricated up. You can see there's a nice sheen of the oil in there. I'm just trying to catch the light just right. There we go, perfect. All right. So luckily, I've got some oiled fingers, so we're going to move our dough right in here, perfect. And using hands covered in oil, so using hands that are oily, you're just gonna spread out your dough with your fingers. Just spread it out into the dish here. Now, this is gonna be a little easier for me because I'm using a smaller, I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm using a smaller dish here, but if you're using the long flat dish like you're supposed to, and you're being a good Italian noodle, wow, that was really insensitive, I'm sorry. A good Italian noodle. A good noodle where you're doing this the traditional Italian way. God, that was really bad, I'm sorry guys. We're just gonna use your hands and spread this out. Now, if it doesn't spread out for whatever reason, you're having an issue spreading it out, that's okay. It just means your bread needs to sit for another 5 minutes or so. So just, again, you don't have to put it back in the bowl, just let it sit here for another 5 minutes, and once it's done, try to spread it out again. And if it doesn't work then, another 5 minutes, and so on and so forth, until you have this beautiful spread out focaccia here. You can see that mine is very much spread out all the way. So, perfect, just get those finishing touches on that. And don't put the finger holes in it yet, okay? We're not doing that yet. We're gonna let it sit for another 15 minutes, and then we're gonna push down on it. All right, so we are going to cover this once again. See, I told you we're gonna use this plastic wrap another time. We're gonna cover this with plastic another time. To the extent possible, if you have to fold over your parchment to make that work, do so. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna fold over my parchment here. Just to make this easier for us. Guys, this is gonna be great. I cannot wait to show you what this looks like and to cut into it. It's gonna be so wonderful. All right, so we are covering this, and we're gonna set a timer for 15 minutes now. And we're gonna throw our tea towel over it again. Kind of wider, here, I'll just put it over here. Ooh, quick thing, set your ovens, 485 degrees, everybody. Set your ovens right now. And we're gonna go check our bread. We're going to, oh, that's our timer. Thank you, timer. All right, let's bring our bread over. Let's take a look. All right, so it's puffed up quite a bit. So now what we're gonna do is take our plastic off. All right, we are done with this, so you can toss this if you want. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we are going to put on our herbs. We have some rosemary here. We're going to do 2 teaspoons of rosemary. I'm using dried, but you should use fresh if you can. Oops. There we And we're just going to lightly sprinkle some rosemary on here. It's beautiful. Hopefully yours looks nice as well. All right, so I've got some rosemary on here. It's going to be lovely. And then I have a 1/4 cup of shredded mozzarella, and I'm just going to sprinkle that on here on top of our rosemary. If you want to use more mozzarella, you definitely can, but you don't have to. And then once we do that, we're going to take some oil. And we're going to create all the fun little holes that focaccia is well known for. So just a little bit in the edges here. Obviously, we don't want to have anywhere without any mozzarella in it. So a little bit over here, a little bit over there, and just there you go. All right. So now what we are going to do, just at the very end here. Oh, I'm sorry. 425 degrees. I'm sorry, not 485. 425. I am so sorry about that, guys. I got it a little wrong. My apologies. 425 degrees. She said 425 degrees. Okay. Goodness gracious. All right. All right. So we're going to take our fingers and we're just going to, so I'm putting 8 fingers now. We're just going to push down and create little dimples in our dough. And just push some of the herbs in and create some of that nice. There we go. And by the way, this is going to help even it out as well. So put as many dimples as you want. Oh, and before we put our oil on, let us put on some coarse salt. This will just give us some extra lovely salty goodness to go on our focaccia. Let's close that off there. And then we're just gonna pour a healthy amount of olive oil. Just little slow drizzle. Just want to put, just put some olive oil on the top here. Now, if you want to go back through your dimples and push it in, or if you want to just turn the tray a little bit and let the oil go where the oil wants to go, you can do that. I'm just gonna spread out, and I'm gonna redo my dimples now that I've got my oil in here. Spread out my oil. This will also allow you to spread out some of the other stuff you've just put on. So there we go. All right, look at that. Doesn't that look wonderful? It's beautiful. All right, so our oven is set. And so this is going to cook for 25 to 30 minutes if you're doing it on a regular tray. Now I'm doing in here. So what I'm probably going to have to do is I'm going to probably have it in for 25 to 45 minutes. And I'm probably going to just cover it with some foil about 30 minutes in, okay? So if you're doing it like this, like I am, nice and thick, it will rise. Remember, it needs to sound hollow when you knock on it with your knuckles, and you need to make sure that no matter what you do, it is at least 205 degrees so it's fully cooked. But, if you don't want to get it too brown, you don't like the color on it at any point. By the way, this is with any bread too. If the color is getting too dark for you, just put a sheet of foil on it if it needs to keep cooking, and it will keep cooking and the color will pretty much stay the same. All right, guys, I am going to get a napkin and then put this in the oven. Thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed making this, and I'll have a picture for it. I'll have a picture for you guys. And I will see you all next time. Take care.